The birth of a vampire can be both painful and pleasurable. They undergo a process and have a story to tell. The night fell gently, wrapping the landscape in a veil of shadows and silver light. The women walked with steady yet hesitant steps, as if each step bore the weight of a decision capable of altering the course of their lives. Their faces, illuminated by the shy glow of the moon, displayed expressions of anticipation, fear, and a silent curiosity burning within their chests. The air around them felt heavier, charged with a magnetism pulling them forward, even though none of them knew exactly what they would find. The trees along the path leaned slightly, as if silent witnesses to the moment, guarding secrets lost to time. Each leaf that fell from above seemed to mark the passage of something deeper than ours, as though fate was writing its next chapter. The path they followed was not just physical, but also symbolic. Each of them carried something they could no longer bear alone: a desire, a doubt, a regret, or a buried hope. The meeting promised answers, but also change. Even without knowing it, they sensed that what awaited at the end of the path would leave none of them untouched. There was a rhythm in their steps, almost as if they were guided by a melody only they could hear. Some glanced back, as if to confirm the world they were leaving behind remained intact. Others kept their eyes fixed ahead, as though fearing that any hesitation might shatter the courage they had gathered to walk this far. The silence among them was not empty, but laden with meaning, as though every thought was shared without the need for words. The emotions driving them were as varied as the stars above. For some, it was the search for something missing, a void that even the brightest days could not fill. For others, it was an escape from something that had pursued them for far too long, an inner or outer shadow that could only be confronted at a distance. And there were those who simply followed, drawn by an inexplicable call, a force they could not understand but found irresistible. As they walked, the world around them shifted subtly. The wind blew with a sharper chill, carrying scents that evoked distant places and forgotten emotions. The trees whispered to one another, as if commenting on the travelers who dared to cross this path. Even the earth seemed to hum faintly beneath their feet, as if it could sense the significance of their journey. None of them knew what awaited them at the end of the trail. It might be a revelation, a new direction, or perhaps the end of something that no longer had purpose. Yet in their hearts, they all understood that the act of walking this path was, in itself, a transformation. Each step was a choice, an act of courage in the face of the unknown. And so they continued, silent, determined, united by something invisible that seemed greater than themselves. The meeting awaited them, hidden between the shadows and the light. Under the pale and erratic glow of the scarlet moon, an unsettling silence dominated the forest. The wind whispered ancient secrets among the twisted treetops, as if trying to warn unwary travelers of the dangers lurking in the shadows. Women wandered through the dense undergrowth, their eyes shimmering with desire and fear, as if drawn by an invisible force. They were solitary figures, some lost, others searching for something they could not even name. Their garments fluttered like specters in the dark, and the whispers from their lips sounded like songs from another era, a chant of longing. The couples who ventured there were different. There was something conflicted about them, as if torn between the love that united them and the threat that surrounded them. Some walked side by side, holding hands, but their steps faltered whenever a branch cracked or a shadow seemed to move too quickly. The weight of ancient tales told by elders on winter nights loomed over them like an inevitable promise. In the densest shadows, the beasts of the night stirred. Werewolves, with their massive bodies and blazing eyes, watched from afar. They were hunters by nature, but they did not always attack. Sometimes they simply waited, letting terror grow, feeding on fear. But it was the vampires who ruled that domain. Elegant and dangerous, they appeared like apparitions among the tree trunks, their presence cloaked in an irresistible aura of seduction and menace. Many of the lost women followed them without hesitation, drawn by promises of eternal passion or simply by their inability to resist the supernatural allure. Some surrendered willingly, offering their necks as a pledge of submission. Others were taken without choice, enveloped in a stupor that blended pleasure and pain. The relationship between them and the vampires was a dark paradox. surrender and dominance, desire and destruction. For some, the cold kiss of the predators was a relief from loneliness, an end to their endless search. For others, it was the beginning of a new existence, between life and death, between the human and the inhuman. And so the forest remained alive, pulsing with tales of passion, fear, and shadows. At the heart of it all, under the light of the scarlet moon, the dance between predators and their prey continued, eternal and relentless. In the quiet of the forest, where moonlight timidly filtered through the treetops, couples and furtive lovers sought refuge for forbidden encounters. The narrow trails, known only to the feet of those yearning for anonymity, became the stage for muffled sighs and whispered words. Every touch, every glance exchanged in the dark, carried the weight of passion and risk. They believed they were alone, hidden by the veil of leaves and the complicity of the night. But they were not. In the dense darkness, watchful eyes observed every movement, every gesture, with a mix of curiosity and hunger. These were not the eyes of ordinary animals, but of something older and more cunning, something that walked among the shadows unnoticed. The lovers came from all walks of life, drawn by the promise of freedom the forest offered. A peasant and the wife of a merchant, a knight and the daughter of a feudal lord. Even those whose alliances were so forbidden their names should never be spoken together. They met beneath twisted trees, under the complicity of stars that seemed to shine brighter over their secret rendezvous. But the forest had ears. The creaking of branches and the rustling of leaves seemed to narrate their stories to unseen entities. Ethereal figures, almost imperceptible, slid like echoes of the night itself. These were the vampires, masters of silence and unwitting guardians of these mortal secrets. They watched not out of envy or disdain, but from pure fascination at the fleeting brilliance of human desire. The couples never sensed the presence of the shadows. Amid the heat of their embraces and the fervor of their whispers, they ignored the chill that seemed to grow around them. They failed to notice the wolves lurking in the distance, utterly silent, or the faint gleam of red eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. To the vampires, these encounters were a painful reminder of what they had lost. Every stolen smile, every touch laden with urgency, was a reflection of a past that now felt as distant as the days when the sun still warmed their skin. But their fascination stemmed from more than nostalgia. The lovers had something the vampires could never reclaim: ephemerality. The fragility of these encounters made them unique, like flowers blooming for only one night before withering forever. There were nights when the vampires merely watched, letting the lovers leave untouched, carrying with them the illusion that their secrets would remain safe. But there were other nights when the temptation became unbearable. The heat of human passion was like an irresistible perfume, and the hunger, ever present, whispered in their minds. Some couples never returned home, their stories vanishing as silently as their bodies into the darkness. The forest, complicit and witness to so many encounters, remained indifferent. The wind continued to blow, the leaves continued to fall, and the couples continued to seek their hideaways among the ancient trunks. And in the twilight, the vampires remained, watching, waiting, remembering a time when perhaps it was they who met under the light of the moon, believing naively that they were alone. The lovers, guided by the fire of passion and the promise of secrets never to be revealed, sought in the darkness of the forest a sanctuary where their forbidden desires could flourish. The clandestine trails that led them to the heart of the woods seemed safe, yet carried a strange atmosphere, as if the very ground held memories of furtive steps and whispered promises. Under the protection of the dark canopy, forbidden couples met in hidden clearings, framed by trees that seemed to bow to protect their secrets. A nobleman and a peasant girl, a priest and another man's wife, a warrior and a youth from a distant village. In each case, love or desire burned brighter for knowing it was wrong, as though transgression amplified the intensity of the moment. But the forest was no empty refuge. It watched, it breathed, and within its shadows, it harbored things mortals could not comprehend. Many of the lovers, blinded by passion, failed to notice that the ones they held in their arms were not always who they imagined. There were nights when a lover's eyes glowed with an unusual predatory light, like embers hidden beneath ash. At other times, the soft skin under their touch concealed a supernatural coldness, a chill that pierced to the bone. Voices once sweet and familiar deepened into rough, resonant tones, as though another entity spoke through them. A young shepherd, believing himself alone with a merchant's daughter, noticed too late that her eyes had turned silver, reflecting the moonlight in an impossible way. The blacksmith's wife, enamored with a mysterious man who never revealed his face, discovered upon kissing him that his teeth were different. These revelations always came too late, at the height of the encounter, when desire overwhelmed the instinct for survival. In that moment, as the lovers realized they faced something far beyond human, fear and fascination intertwined. Some fled, but many remained, hypnotized by the force that radiated from their partners. Not all of these beings were hostile. Some sought in their human lovers a lost connection, a memory of times when they too had known love. Others, however, fed on human desire, drinking passion and fear as though they were an irresistible nectar. The forest thus became a stage for encounters that transcended the mortal world. Every kiss, every touch, carried the weight of an unknown danger, as if love itself were a currency in an ancient, complex game. The human lovers, in their naivete, barely realized they were pieces in a cosmic dance of light and darkness. Some never returned home, their disappearances explained by legends of nocturnal predators or stories of betrayals leading to exile. But there were those who did return, bearing invisible scars, transformed by something they could not explain. Their memories of the encounters were hazy, but they carried a void, a loss, as if a part of them had remained forever in the shadows of the forest. Each night, new lovers crossed the forest's boundaries, ignoring the warnings and whispered tales in the nearby villages. And the forest, ever watchful, continued to be witness, confidant, and executioner, offering refuge and risk in equal measure. Beneath its eternal canopy, forbidden encounters unfolded, though the outcome was never guaranteed, for the secrets of the night belonged only to the forest and the creatures that dwelled within it. The lovers, seduced by the mystery of their encounters, never questioned the intentions of those who promised them everything. In the stillness of the forest, under the pale light of the moon, words as sweet as honey fell from lips that concealed sharp fangs. The creatures who lured them, with eyes that gleamed like jewels in the dim light, promised a love that would never end, an eternity where time could never extinguish desire. It was easy to believe. The promises came wrapped in gentle gestures, in gazes that seemed to touch the soul. "You will never need to fear death," they whispered, their voices vibrating like a song. "Come with me, and the world will bow at your feet." For those who yearned for more than their limited lives could offer, the proposition was irresistible. The lovers rarely sensed the danger until it was too late. In the heat of the moment, their minds were wrapped in a seductive fog, a veil that obscured what lay behind the perfection of their partners. The creatures never forced them. They didn't need to. Their presence was intoxicating, each word a carefully laid snare. Some lovers hesitated, their mortal hearts pounding with doubt. But the creatures were patient, waiting for the moment when the weakness of desire or ambition would finally triumph. "What is there to fear?" they would say, with smiles as gentle as they were dangerous. "I am offering you what everyone desires and few achieve: freedom, power, and the chance to live without end." When the choice was made, the moment of surrender was charged with intensity. The kiss that sealed the pact was unlike any other. It was deep, painful, and overwhelming, a shock that pierced both body and soul. The fangs, hidden until then, sank in with precision, and the warmth of blood was replaced by an eternal cold. At first, the transformed lover could not grasp the magnitude of what had been lost and gained. There was euphoria, a sense of power that made the world feel small and insignificant. Their senses sharpened. The rustling of leaves grew louder, the scents of the forest more vivid. But soon the hunger came, an unrelenting, ever-present force that could never be truly satisfied. The creatures who had seduced the lovers did not vanish, but were no longer the same companions they had seen before. Now they were masters, guides to a new existence. but also keepers of secrets the newly turned were not yet ready to understand. They revealed the nocturnal world in all its complexity, but the promises of freedom and power always came at a price. The lovers who accepted the pact could never return to their former lives. Their names were forgotten, their families left behind as distant echoes of a mortal life that now felt like a dream. They became shadows in the forest, hunters in a world that would never accept them as they were. And so, the forest remained the stage for these transformations, a place where human desires collided with ancient forces. The promises of immortality and power were always fulfilled, but never in the way the lovers had imagined. As the forest grew and changed, their stories became woven into the fabric of the night, a reminder that, under the light of the moon, nothing is ever as it seems. The women, enveloped by passion and mystery, surrendered to their lovers with blind trust, as if the warmth of their touch and the depth of their gazes were enough to dispel any shadow of doubt. Beneath the moon's silver glow, their encounters were intense, almost divine, and the whispered words in the shadows promised eternal devotion. They believed themselves to be unique, chosen, loved in a way that transcended the mundane. But the revelation came like a sudden blow, a moment when the veil was lifted, and the raw, unfiltered truth stood before them. It was not uncommon for this to happen at the height of an encounter, when bodies were closest and hearts beat fastest. A sudden movement, a smile revealing gleaming fangs, or an absent reflection in the water's surface, made it clear that their lovers were not human. The impact was devastating. Some froze in fear, their bodies betraying their minds screaming to flee. Others, stunned by the revelation, felt the shock transform into a wave of anger or disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me before?" was a question that often echoed among the trees, but the answer always came with the same cruel serenity. You wouldn't have understood. For many, fear was soon replaced by an unsettling sense of even deeper attraction. The truth about their lovers did not diminish the fascination. On the contrary, it heightened it. The idea of loving something that did not belong to the mortal world was both terrifying and irresistible. It was as if the darkness surrounding them made everything more alive, more vibrant. But this revelation also came with a choice. The vampire lovers, though seductive, were also ruthless. They did not offer explanations, only promises. "You can leave now, return to your ordinary life," they would say, "but know that you'll never find anything like this again. Or you can stay and accept all that I am, with all the consequences." Some women chose to leave, though many could never truly forget. They returned to their lives, but the faces of the vampires, their soft voices, and their piercing gazes remained etched like a scar on their souls. Others, however, gave in, not out of coercion, but out of desire. For these women, the vampiric nature of their lovers was not a barrier, but an extraordinary promise. Accepting the true nature of the vampires was like crossing a portal. From that moment on, the world seemed different. The nights grew longer, the sounds of the forest more vivid, and the air itself seemed charged with a magnetism they had never noticed before. They knew they were stepping onto a path with no return, but the allure of eternity, of strength and power that the vampires embodied, outweighed any fear. And so, in the depths of the forest, these forbidden relationships took a new turn. They were no longer mere encounters of worldly passion, but pacts that involved life, death, and everything in between. The women who chose to stay transformed into something more, not entirely human, yet not fully creatures of the night. The vampire lovers, in turn, watched with satisfaction, knowing they had gained more than hearts. They had shaped new destinies, intertwining their eternities with those who dared to love the unknown. And beneath the moon's silver light, the secrets continued to grow, just like the shadows that shrouded those clandestine encounters. The women who surrendered to their vampire lovers experienced a desire that transcended the human. In the instant their fangs pierced the skin, a mixture of pain and ecstasy overwhelmed their bodies. The bite was not merely a physical rupture, it was as if their very soul was laid bare and offered to the night. The warmth of the flowing blood and the supernatural coldness of their lovers' lips created a contrast so intense it seemed to destroy and recreate them in a single moment. The transformation began with an agony that felt eternal. The heart, once beating vigorously, slowed until it stopped, as though protesting against the inevitable. It was a slow death, yet a conscious one, where every fiber of the body rebelled against what was happening. The pain was unbearable, a flame burning from within, but it soon gave way to an overwhelming pleasure, as if every drop of mortal life was being replaced with something magical. When the metamorphosis was finally complete, silence followed. A strange, deafening silence, as if the entire world paused to witness the birth of something new. The women, now creatures of the night, opened their eyes to a transformed world. The sounds of the forest, once distant and indistinct, became clear and piercing, like a symphony they had never noticed. The moonlight seemed brighter, almost blinding, and the air carried scents that had previously been imperceptible. But along with this heightened perception came an unbearable emptiness. The hunger, insatiable and urgent, consumed their every thought. It was a desire that could not be ignored, a visceral need that threatened to overwhelm them. Yet this hunger was not for food or comfort. It was for the warmth of blood, for the vital essence that now defined their survival. The moments following their transformation were an abyss of conflicting emotions. Some wept, realizing they would never be the same, that their mortal lives had been sacrificed in exchange for a power that now felt like a burden. Others laughed, intoxicated by the newfound strength coursing through their veins, feeling invincible, like goddesses sculpted from darkness. The first time they felt another person's blood flow through their mouths was a rite of passage marking their new existence. Some resisted, attempting to deny what they had become, but the hunger always won. When they finally succumbed, the act was both disturbing and maddening. The warmth of the life they consumed filled the void for a fleeting moment, but brought with it guilt and horror at becoming something they had once been unable to comprehend. Their vampire lovers watched calmly, like patient masters who understood that this initial chaos was part of the transformation. They consoled them with gentle words, promising that the pain would fade, that the hunger would be tamed, and that one day they would accept what they had become. "You are eternal now," they said, their eyes gleaming with a mixture of pride and possessiveness. "The night is yours to command." But for many of them, eternity felt more like a prison than a gift. The humanity that lingered within them battled against their murderous impulses, against the hunger that never fully disappeared. They wandered among the trees, feeling the weight of time stretching before them like an endless ocean, wondering if the love that had brought them there was truly worth the price of their souls. And so, in the silence of the forest, these newly transformed women faced their first of countless nights as immortal beings. Between the pain of what they had lost and the pleasure of what they had gained, they became something new, something the mortal world could never fully comprehend. The forest, a silent witness to countless similar encounters, seemed to hold the energy of this dark pact between desire and death. Each woman who gave herself to the vampire was not merely a victim. She became part of something greater, something eternal. And so, under the veil of night, the vampire continued his reign, feeding not just on blood, but on the voluntary surrender that made each moment unique. Each woman a fragment of an endless story. The forest, in turn, kept calling them, one by one, like a portal between human desire and the dark embrace of immortality. The transformation into a vampire did not follow a predictable logic. It was a mystery shrouded in shadows, as though the night itself chose the fate of each new child it embraced. For some women, the process was abrupt, like a flame extinguished only to reignite as an eternal fire. Their hearts stopped almost instantly, and within hours they awoke to immortality, still enveloped by the warmth of their last mortal moment. For others, however, the path was far longer and more tortuous. They withered slowly, as though every fragment of their humanity was being stripped away piece by piece. They felt their blood drained day by day, while their bodies, still inhabited by a faint spark of life, seemed to resist the inevitable. These women became specters of themselves, pale and silent, as though part of them had already crossed to the other side. Those around them, unable to comprehend the depth of what was happening, mourned what appeared to be natural deaths. They were mourned, laid out, and buried, their bodies resting in the earth like any mortals. But this rest was only an illusion. Hours or days later, governed by forces no one could predict, their eyes opened in the darkness of the grave, and their rebirth began. This awakening was an act of strength and terror. Each breath in the suffocating soil was a struggle against oblivion, an effort to escape the shroud that sought to bind them to the world of the dead. When they finally emerged, covered in dirt and steeped in the scent of death, they encountered a world transformed, and they themselves were creatures they could no longer recognize. For some, the rebirth was gentler. They awoke in protected chambers, under the watchful eyes of their creators, who guided them through the whirlwind of sensations. For others, the process was solitary and brutal, as though the darkness tested their worth. Each woman endured a unique journey, shaped by the strength of her spirit and the depth of her surrender to the lover who had transformed her. The pain of the transformation also varied. Some felt as though every nerve was aflame, an agony lasting so long that death seemed like a relief. Others experienced a strange calm, a torpor that cradled them as their mortal lives faded like a forgotten dream. At times, pleasure intertwined with pain, creating a paradox none could articulate. The marks left by the process went beyond the physical. Some emerged with eyes filled with wisdom, as though every moment of their mortal lives had been etched into their memories forever. Others, however, appeared lost, disoriented, as though immortality had stripped them of all they once were. Some wept upon realizing the depth of their change. Others laughed, intoxicated by the newfound power coursing through their veins. The only constant was hunger. This primal call was the single thread connecting all those transformed, an insatiable hunger that pulsed like a second life within their bodies. Each dealt with it in her own way, but none could escape it. The mystery of the process lay in its unpredictability. Vampire lovers, though ancient and powerful, admitted they could not fully understand how or why each transformation unfolded uniquely. The night has its secrets, they would say, with an enigmatic smile, and now you are one of them. This uncertainty was both a gift and a burden. For the women who endured the transformation, the understanding that their change was singular marked them profoundly. They were now creatures of mystery, shaped by forces that transcended human comprehension. And as the night became their only home, each carried the weight of her own story, unique, like a footprint left in the snow before the sun melted it away. When the women awakened beneath the cold earth, their now immortal bodies bore the marks of the slow and painful process of death they had endured. Every muscle seemed to remember the suffering, every fiber was filled with the memory of agony and the farewell to a life that had slipped away before the eyes of grieving loved ones. These relatives, unaware of the supernatural fate that awaited their beloved, mourned what they believed to be an inexplicable illness or sudden frailty, never imagining that their tears would be shed in vain. The silence of the cemetery was the first thing they noticed upon emerging. It was not the same silence they had known in life. This one felt heavy, as if the very air were aware of what had happened. They smelled the damp earth, and above all, they felt a presence within themselves, the hunger, ravenous and insatiable, like a cry that could not be silenced. Some were met by their creators, shadowy figures who waited patiently for their creations to rise from death. These masters, with an approving gaze and an almost paternal touch, offered the first words of guidance. "You are free now," they would say, their voices echoing in the stillness of the night. "But freedom comes at a price. Come with me, and I will teach you how to survive." For these, the rebirth was guided, a careful lesson on the rules and dangers of their new existence. Others, however, were not so fortunate. Their creators had vanished like ghosts, leaving only a trace of darkness. These women, alone in the cemetery, faced the terror and confusion without anyone to guide them. With wide eyes, they wandered among the graves, trying to understand where they were and what they had become. Hunger drove them to leave the cemetery quickly. Somehow, they instinctively knew that staying there was dangerous. The living, who once mourned their deaths, could not accept the return of these women as something natural. The lights of nearby villages now seemed hostile, and they understood they needed to find refuge far from the eyes of those who had loved them in life. For some, the escape was a desperate impulse. a stumbling flight through tombstones and bushes until the forest embraced them. The darkness of the trees, once a source of fear, now felt like a safe haven, a place to hide until they decided their next steps. For others, the departure was more calculated. They observed the stars, felt the wind, and trusted an inner call that guided them to an unknown destination. The voices of family members still echoed in their minds, the tear-streaked faces, the whispered farewells. Some felt an overwhelming emptiness, a grief for what they had lost, while others experienced a strange freedom, as though death had broken invisible chains that once held them. The creators who stayed by their creation's sides explained the realities of immortality. "You no longer belong to their world," they would say firmly. "The life you knew is over. Now the night is your ally and blood is your necessity. You must learn to hide and hunt, or you will be hunted." These words, though harsh, offered a form of comfort, a direction amidst the chaos. Those who were alone, however, had to rely on their instincts. Some found refuge in caves or forgotten ruins, far from roads and villages. Others, bolder, lingered on the fringes of society, hiding among travelers or outcasts, trying to survive without drawing attention. The rebirth was different for each of them, but they all shared the same challenge: to learn to live as creatures of the night, to reconcile with what they had become, and to accept that the cemetery where they awakened was only the beginning of an endless journey. The pain and mystery of the process bound them invisibly, forging a dark connection among all those who had risen from the grave to face eternity. The birth of a vampire often started with what seemed like a chance encounter. During a solitary stroll, these women would meet their mysterious lover for the first time. Overcome by a powerful force, they would leave at nightfall, as if responding to a call only they could hear. Their once sweet and familiar gazes became vacant, as if their thoughts no longer belonged to the world they knew. Silently, they would slip out of their homes, bare feet on the cold ground, drawn by an invisible force pulsing through the darkness of the forest. The forest welcomed them like an ancient lover, parting its trees as the wind played with their loose hair. There was no hesitation in their steps, only feverish curiosity and an overwhelming desire that pushed them deeper among the gnarled trunks and creeping mist. It was as though every leaf and every twig snapping underfoot sang a melody only they could hear. Back in their homes, husbands awoke to find empty beds and doors left ajar. Panic was immediate. They called out their wives' names, searched the rooms, hoping it was all a mistake or a bad dream. But the truth soon became undeniable. They were gone, vanished into the dead of night without a trace. Grabbing lanterns and torches, the men ventured into the forest, dismissing the old stories whispered by the elders. These tales spoke of the forest as a living thing that called to those it desired, and that no one, once taken, ever returned. But the men could not accept such a fate for their loved ones. Their search was desperate. They shouted their names, but the forest answered only with echoes, a cruel mockery. The trees seemed taller, more menacing. The silence, broken only by the sounds of footsteps and cries, grew heavier with every passing moment. Meanwhile, the women were far away, wrapped in a sense of ecstasy and surrender. It was as if they had been chosen, as if some ancient, irresistible secret was being unveiled to them. When the men finally reached clearings or followed trails to the heart of the forest, it was already too late. There were no bodies, no concrete signs, only an overwhelming sense that something had taken their wives forever. Some men continued the search, stubborn and determined, while others collapsed to their knees, defeated among the twisted roots. For those who pressed on, the forest seemed to toy with their minds, altering paths and obscuring the stars. And at the center of it all, beyond mortal reach, the predator watched them. The vampire, the one who orchestrated the call, smiled from the shadows. He knew the husbands would never arrive in time. The women's surrender had not been forced. It was a deep, undeniable desire. The women had become part of the mystery. In the heart of the forest, the women who answered the call faced a fate mortals only dared to whisper about in nightmares. The process was not a gentle gift, but a violent metamorphosis marked by pain, desire, and the final severance from their humanity. The first sensation was the cold, a supernatural frost that seeped into their bones, replacing the warmth of their blood with something lifeless and unchanging. Each heartbeat felt like a blade slicing through their veins as the warmth of life was drained and replaced with an insatiable void. They did not scream, for their voices failed them, but their eyes, wide and glistening, reflected the agony of the transformation. Their bodies, once fragile and mortal, twisted as if resisting their own destiny. Muscles burned beneath their skin, as though reshaped by invisible hands. Bones cracked and adjusted to newfound strength, while their senses expanded far beyond what any human could endure. The world around them exploded in detail. The sound of distant heartbeats, the glow of insects in the dark. A primal and uncontrollable hunger consumed their minds, tearing apart any trace of sanity. It was an overwhelming void, an abyss that demanded to be filled, and the only answer to it was blood. They craved it with an intensity that frightened even them, even amidst the pain of their transformation. The vampire, their creator, watched closely, impassive. He knew the agony was necessary, that suffering was the price to leave mortality behind and step into eternity. Some would not endure. Some would succumb before the transformation was complete, their fragile forms rejecting the dark gift. But those who survived emerged as reborn creatures, immortal and predatory. When the process ended, the women were no longer the same. Their eyes, once filled with life, now shone with a cold, supernatural light. Their skin, pale as marble, carried an inhuman perfection, while the traces of their past lives faded like distant memories. Their bodies, now strong and agile, moved with a grace that defied human logic. The first breath after rebirth was a moment of pure instinct. They felt the forest around them as never before. Every leaf, every creature, every distant heartbeat. But it was the scent of blood that dominated. The insatiable, painful hunger forced them to rise unsteady in search of their first prey. Some wept, tears of blood streaming down their faces as they fought against what they had become. Others quickly accepted their fate, surrendering to the new call burning within them. The vampire watched in silence, satisfied, as his newly reborn creations took their first steps into the dark world they now inhabited. The forest, which had once embraced them as mortals, now revered them as predators. They were no longer lost women, but something beyond, something terrible and beautiful. Under the pale light of the moon, the vampiresses rose as shadows of the night, ready to embrace the eternity bestowed upon them, an eternity that began with blood. After their transformation, the women awakened to a world that seemed new, yet had always been there, hidden beneath the veil of mortality. Every detail was now amplified, every sensation expanded beyond human limits. The forest around them, once a dark and threatening place, became a vibrant mosaic of life. The trunks of trees seemed to pulse with the earth's energy, the leaves whispered secrets to the wind, and even the shadows had depth and motion. Their senses were an uncontrollable symphony. They could hear the sound of sap rising through roots, the frantic fluttering of invisible insect wings, and, far away, the steady rhythm of human hearts. The entire world seemed to breathe around them, and every sound, scent, and movement carried an irresistible allure. The light, even the pale glow of the moon, was different. It did not merely illuminate, it revealed. They could see the texture of moss on trunks from meters away, the delicate spiderwebs swaying in the night breeze. The glow of the stars, once a distant comfort, was now intense and almost intrusive, as if each one was watching them in return. But it was in the scent of blood that their new nature truly manifested. The aroma, once imperceptible, now enveloped them like an irresistible perfume. They could distinguish nuances, the vibrant, youthful blood brimming with life, or the older, slower blood carrying the weight of memories. The desire to hunt was instinctive, as natural as breathing once had been, and resisting it felt like a futile struggle against their very essence. Time had also become strange. The present moment stretched endlessly, every second laden with details and meanings they had never noticed before. At the same time, memories of their mortal lives began to fade, like ink washed away by the sun. Small fragments remained, the sound of laughter, the touch of a hand. But these remnants felt distant and unreal. like forgotten dreams. They moved with a grace that had been impossible before. There was no hesitation in their steps, only certainty and absolute control. They could scale tree trunks with feline agility, vanish in the blink of an eye into the shadows, and feel the world around them as an extension of their own bodies. Mortality, with its limitations and weaknesses, was now a faint, almost laughable memory. Their emotions, too, had changed. The fear that once guided them had vanished entirely. In its place was a dangerous confidence, a sense of absolute power, but this power came with a disquieting emptiness. Love, compassion, and guilt still lingered, but they were distorted, like reflections in a broken mirror. The desire for blood often overshadowed every other feeling, dominating even the most tender memories. As they walked through the forest, the newly created vampiresses felt the weight of their new existence. Eternity stretched before them, both fascinating and crushing. The freedom they had longed for came with the realization that they were bound to something far greater than they could control. The hunger, the loneliness, and the darkness that now defined them. And so, under the night sky, they moved like silent predators, learning to see the world with transformed eyes. Each step took them further from who they had been and closer to something ancient and unfathomable. Mortality was left behind, and before them lay the infinite, illuminated by the silver light of the moon and the cruel gleam of their own nature. The vampiresses, newly reborn under the silver light of the moon, knew they could never return to the homes they once called their own. The houses, the sunlit fields, and the faces they had once loved now belonged to a world they had left behind. The warmth of humanity repelled them as much as it attracted them, and the emptiness of eternity demanded something grander. They needed a new home, a refuge that mirrored their new nature and shielded them from the fragility of mortality that still lingered around them. It was in the wild expanse of the forest that they found the creatures who would become their companions. Wolves with golden eyes and sharp fangs emerged from the shadows like specters of the earth. The creatures, once fierce and free, now bowed to the presence of the vampiresses, as if they recognized in them a greater power, something older and darker than the very instincts that guided them. The wolves were not merely allies, they were subjects. Every growl seemed like an oath of loyalty, every movement a dance synchronized with the new mistresses of the night. The vampiresses, in turn, felt the connection pulse like an invisible current, a bond formed not through fear but through the irresistible force that now emanated from them. Their gazes pierced the veil of the creatures' minds, commanding obedience without a single word. Together, vampiresses and wolves became an unstoppable force. But the story is only just beginning.